We continue now at the top of Daf Samech Dalet Amud Beis in Meseches Bava Kamma. This is Bava Kamma Daf 64b. On the previous summit, the Gemara is dealing with the Talmud of Echizkiah. The Talmud of Echizkiah is being brought as the source that a Ganav pays kefil, according to the Manda Amar who said on the previous Daf that the other psukim we dealt with are not talking about a Ganav paying kefil. They're talking about a Toein Tainas Ganav paying kefil. So we needed a source that a Ganav pays kefil according to that Manda Amar. And so that's why the Gemara brought the Talmud of Echizkiah. The Talmud of Echizkiah is dealing with the pasuk of Im Timatze biyado hagneva mishor ad chamor ad sechayim shnayim yeshalim. So it mentions at the end of the pasuk shnayim yeshalim paying kefil, and the Talmud of Echizkiah darshans the pasuk the way Rava interprets the drush of the pasuk is a klal upratu klal, meaning to say that the word geneva is a klal, the word chayim at the end is a klal, all of the specifications in the middle are prat, and we understand it as a klal upratu klal. But according to Rava, the Talmud of Echizkiah actually ends with a question, because the Talmud of Echizkiah is saying that it's a klal upratu klal that should actually end up including everything, because there's too many prats in there. Without getting into the details, the point is you don't need all of the prats. They should have been included anyway, and so therefore that extra prat at the very end is including everything. But the Talmud of Echizkiah ends with a question: what do we need himatze timatze for? It seems to be extra. We've already included everything. And so the Gemara now says, if so, shaper kashale. If that's the case, so the Talmud of Echizkiah is actually ending with a good kasha. If himatze timatze are not necessary, we've already learned that there's a concept of a Ganav paying kefil with anything that he steals. What do we need himatze timatze for? What is the answer to that question? And the Gemara says to that, mishum de islay pircha. The answer to that question is there is a refutation. We really can't fully learn it out from the klal upratu klal. Why is it that we can't use the klal upratu klal? Because l'rabos kol davar. Because what are we really saying? How are we knowing when we say that we include everything in kefil in terms of when a Ganav steals anything he has to pay kefil? Mehecha kamaisile. Ultimately, where are we learning that from? Michlal basra. We're learning it from the last klal. We'll see Rashi in a moment, but the idea is that a klal upratu klal, it's the last klal that is really coming to include things. But the problem is that this last klal is limited in and of itself. Klola gufe chayim ksibbe. That klal itself, what is the klal? It says the word chayim. And so therefore, when it says the word chayim, that would seem to be only balei chayim, only animals, and that could be problematic. It wouldn't really include everything, and that's ultimately why we need himatze timatze. We'll take a look at Tosas first. Ihachi shaper kashale. If so, the Talmud of Echizkiah ends with a good question. Umeshani mishum de islay pircha. The answer of the Gemara is that there's a refutation to learning from the klal upratu klal. Avagav de hay pircha lesa bebraisa. And Tosas notes this refutation isn't in the brisa. Why doesn't the brisa finish and explain that the klal upratu klal has a refutation? That's what we need himatze timatze for. Haynu mishum de lo chosh lefarsha. That's just because the brisa was not concerned to explain it, but that really is what the brisa means. And the Gemara continues, Klal upratu klal, my kamahanile. What are we using the klal upratu klal for at the end of the Talmud of Echizkiah? Ilasuye kol davar. If it's really to include everything, as it seems to be saying, that's problematic. That's this pircha hachayim ksiv. It says the word chayim there. Balei chayim in midi achrinalo. That seems like only animals and nothing else. Mishum hachan. It's for that reason. Itzrich im himatze. That's why we need im himatze. And so that's the ultimate answer, the ultimate resolution to what Talmud of Echizkiah is saying. Im himatze timatze. The very end of the Talmud of Echizkiah, which is really left as a question, but really that is necessary to teach that everything is included when it comes to the Ganav paying kefil. And Rashi explains, Zihachi shaper kakashalo yomai teshuva yesh bedavar. The Talmud of Echizkiah ends with a good question. What is the answer to the question? Hachi garsina l'rabos kol davar mehecha maisi la miklal basra. Where are we really learning to include everything in terms of by a Ganav paying kefil? It's from the last klal. Klal gufa chayim ksibe. It says the word chayim over there to limit it. It really should only be limited to balei chayim. How do we include everything? It's from himatze timatze. Kilomar itzrich im himatze timatze. What it's saying is that we do need himatze timatze. Di'imi gneva v'chayim. If you're going to make a drasha from Geneva Chaim Darash Lechlal, you're going to use this klal upratu klal from Geneva and Chaim. That Geneva is the first klal, Chaim is the last klal. Equal Mifrach, there would be a refutation. Shar Devorim Mehecha Maisislu. How are you learning everything from there? Miklola Basra, you're really learning it from the last klal. Af kol klola guve Chaim ksibe, but that klal itself just says Chaim. And Rashi explains how klal upratu klal works. The chol hecha de darshinam klal upratu klal, because anytime we darshan a klal upratu klal, af miklola basra midrash. So we're really including the extra things from the last klal. The klola Kamma lemuute hudasi, because the first klal is actually a limiting klal. The velav you have a pratu klal disrabu kalmile, because if you didn't have the first klal, it would be a pratu klal which would include everything. The rule is that if you only have a pratu klal, it includes everything. So that first klal actually limits you and says don't include absolutely everything. That's a limit limiting klal. The first klal comes to exclude anything that's not similar to the prat. It's again a limiting klal. And that last klal is the one that's actually the including klal, that would really include everything, if not for the limitation placed by the first klal. If not for the last klal, it would be a klal prat, and the rule by a klal prat is ve'in bichlal elamasha beprat. You only include the thing that's specified. It's very limited. That last klal comes to include other things. But therefore you're going to darshan from a balei chayim, and then the whole klal is going to be nullified. And the klal prat is going to be nullified. The afagav the darish tana de Rabbi Shmuel bialma klala de lo dami hanimil lirubuye midi to have a bichlal basra. Now, even though we said the tana de Rabbi Shmuel we addressed on the previous Talmud that the tana de Rabbi Shmuel holds the last klal doesn't have to be similar to the first klal. That's true. You can still do a klal prat to klal, but still you can't include beyond the last klal. And so if the last klal over here is chayim, it would actually not include anything that goes beyond balei chayim, and that is what is problematic. That's why we need himatzei timatzei. That's how we can expand this and include other items, as the Gemara will explain. But the Gemara continues, Amri, the sages say as follows, V'ashnei klolos desmichi hadadinenu. How do we even say that the words himatzei timatzei represent a klal uprat klal? The words himatzei timatzei are right next to each other. It's shnei klolos desmichi hadadi. If you have two klolos next to each other, is that a klal uprat klal? And the Gemara says to that, Amar Ravina says, Keda Amri b'ma'arov, it's like they say in the West, Kol makom shatamotzi shnei klolos hasmuchim zelozeh. Anytime you have two klals next to each other, hatil prat beineim, you can take the prats, you can take the specifications and put them between the words, v'dunam b'chlalu prat, and then you actually could learn it like a klalu pratu klal. And so therefore the Gemara explains, shadi shor bein himatzei litimatzei. You now take the word shor and you put that between the words himatzei and timatzei. La'suyemai. Now what does that come to include? Ila suyei balei chayim, if it's to include all living animals, mechayim nafka, that we already learned, again in the Talmud of Echizkiah, from the word chayim to include balei chayim. Ela la'suyei davar she'ein balei chayim, rather it must be to include even something that is not an animal is included in the halach of kefel. U'derosh hachi, and therefore you should darshan as follows, mahaprat mefurish davar hametaltel v'gufo mamon, just like that specification that we're throwing, this word shor that we're putting between the words, is something that's a movable object and has intrinsic monetary value. Afkal davar hametaltel v'gufo mamon. So to anything that is a movable object and has intrinsical monetary value is going to be included in the halach of kefel by a ganef. And then you have to take the word chamor and put it between himatzei and timatzei. What does that come to include? If it's to include something that's not a balei chayim, mishor nafka, we already learned that out from shore. Rather, it's to include something that is mesuyim, as we explained earlier, something that has a siman. Only something that has a siman is included in the halacha of paying kefel. But the Gemara says, but if that's the case, what do we need the word sef for? You still end up with an extra word that's not teaching us anything. And so the Gemara changes its approach to himatzei timatzei. Ela riba umiet v'ribahu. Rather, it's not a klal pratu klal. It's what we call a riba miet riba, which is an inclusion, exclusion, inclusion, and from that we can learn everything. As the Gemara explains, Kidatana Devei Rabbi Yishmael, it's like was taught in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael. Tatana Devei Rabbi Yishmael, because it was taught in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael. Ba'mayim beis pa'amim. It says in the pasuk Ba'mayim 2 times. Ein ze klalu prat. So when it says in the pasuk Ba'mayim 2 times, this is talking about the halachas of what is considered kosher, like a kosher fish. What's considered kosher in the water? That is not a klalu prat. Ela riba umiyat v'riba. That's actually a riba miyat uriba. Riba hakolin, and includes everything. My ravi. So therefore, what is included over here? Ravi kol mili. Everything is included, meaning again, in this case from himatzei to himatzei, all things are included in the halacha of kefil when it comes to a ganev. But the Gemara says if that's the case, hihachi, if so, kol hani prati lamali. So what do we need all the prats for? We have all these different prats here that we're throwing in the middle. What's the point of them? And to that the Gemara says chad lemu'utei karka. One is to exclude land from the halacha of kefil. V'chad lemu'utei avodim. One is to exclude slaves from the halacha of kefil. V'chad lemu'utei shtaros. And one is to exclude shtaros from the halacha of kefil. And geneva v'chaim, what are we doing with geneva v'chaim? Because again, we don't really need geneva v'chaim. We don't need the whole klal upratu klal at all. We're already learning it now from a riba miyat riba. So what do we do with geneva v'chaim? L'chid Rav. That's actually for a different teaching. It's for the teaching of Rav. The Omar, because Rav said achya lekeren ke'en shagonav. We darshan geneva v'chaim as achya lekeren ke'en shagonav, using the word chayim as achya and using the word geneva as ke'en shagonav. The idea is that when it comes to paying back, You have to pay back what was stolen. Let's say the item that you stole depreciates in value, so it's not enough to give back that item. That item is now worth less, and therefore you have to give back the amount in terms of the value that was stolen. And Rashi explains, "V'hatrei klali desmichin inu, aren't these two klals next to each other? Himatze timatze, meaning the word himatze timatze are next to each other. Ve'ech himatze lemedrash minayu klalu pratu klal. How do you even do a klalu pratu klal when the two klals are next to each other? And the Gemara said, "Hatil prat hakasa betzidon beineim." You take the prat that's written next to them and you put it between them. Ela la'asuye davar hamesuyim. Rather, it comes to include something that's mesuyim in, meaning in this halacha of kefil, only something that has a siman, that has a sign that you can identify it by. But something that's not mesuyim is not included. And Rashi says we're learning this out just from the fact that there's an extra word. We're not learning it out from anything from the word itself. The word itself doesn't have any indication that we're talking about something with a siman, because the word over here that we're actually talking about, when we're talking about davar mesuyim, we're actually learning it out from the word chamor. The word chamor is not something with a siman. The yesh behem was harbe shein ben siman. There are many animals that don't have a siman. The imi mashmusa the kranafka tepuk micha ein haprat ashor. If we're learning it from if we're going to learn it out from the sound of what the pasuk is saying, from what it sounds like the pasuk is implying, you might as well just learn it out from shore. If we're going to say shore is something with a siman, just say that it has to be something like a shore. So it's not that we're learning it out from the word chamor in the pasuk, that chamor is something that has a siman. It's just an extra word, and therefore we learn out davar mesuyim. And Rashi continues, Hachi Garcina and the Tana de Very Shmal, Bamayim base palm. It says Bamayim twice. Velo Gars Kol Makom Shenemar Bamayim. Don't have the gears of any time it says Bamayim. Tochlu Kol Asher Bamayim, Kol Asher Lo Sna Perva Kaskeses Bamayim. It says Bamayim twice again in that pasuk. Hoel Uchlolim Smuchim Hem, since those are klolim near each other. Vahaprat Eno Beinei. And the point is that these specifications are not really between those words. El Achareim, because if they're actually written afterwards, by Yomim Uvanecholim, in the seas and in the streams, Demashma the Yomim snapir v'kaskeses. That sounds like in Yamim and Necholim we need snapir v'kaskeses. Aval shichenu ma'oras lo, but other areas where water might be, we don't need it. Ein ze nidrish bechlalu prat. We don't darshan this pasuk as a klalu prat. To lo lisr be ela kein prat. Then we would only include things like the prat. Ela beriba umiyat v'riba. Rather, we learn it as a riba miyat v'riba. Visrabi kol mili, and everything is really going to be included. Ela demiyat mehani lemute pursa chadamilsa v'sulo. You just have a very limited exclusions, and that's all. Otherwise, everything is included. And then the Gemara said, Chad l'mu'utei karka. The Gemara said that all these prats, what are they coming to exclude? One comes to exclude karka, one avodim, one shtaros. V'yad hashla lo motzi l'trutzei hachi. Rashi points out, until now we couldn't say this. T'chi have a daininan lehu bechlalu prat, lo have a misrabe ke'ein haprat, elo davar ha'metaltal v'gufo mammon. Because when we were darshaning it as a klalu prat, so we only included things that were like the prat, that meant that it was davar ha'metaltal v'gufo mammon, u'memela have a memati kolani, and that means automatically these items were excluded, because these items are not considered davar hamataltal. Karka does not move. Avodim is compared to karka, or shtaros, which is not gufo mammon. So automatically that was excluded from the klalu pratu klal. If you're saying anything similar, or if you're saying anything that's metaltal the gufo mammon. But now that we're learning it from a riba miyat v'riba, which really includes everything, so now we really do need psukim to exclude these specific items, and that's what the various prats are excluding. They're excluding these specific items, and then the very last thing of geneva and chayim. What do we need that for? Again, if we have a riba miyat v'riba, what do we need geneva v'chayim? Achi l'karen kein shaganav l'kamon hi b'shmaitin dim ganav behema v'hukachasha. This is later on in the sugi. If a person steals an animal and it weakens, or huzla goes down in value, mishalim kashas haganeva. You have to pay what it was worth at the time that it was stolen. Dechsev chayim. That's what we learn from the word. It's written chayim in the pasuk. Hachiyeyu l'karen shel ganeva sheyei shalom. You have to revive the principle of that thing which was stolen, that it should be whole, that you're paying back something that you actually stole, the value that you actually stole. And the Gemara continues, Ulamando Amar Chad Beganav Echad Betoin Tainas Ganav. Going back to the brises we had in the previous daf, again, there was one mandamar that said that there was a pasuk of Im Yimotze Haganav, and there was a pasuk of Im Lo Yimotze Haganav. So according to the one who understood those psukim, that the first pasuk, Im Yimotze Haganav, is talking about the Ganav paying kefil, and the second pasuk is talking about Toin Tainas Ganav paying kefil. The Ganav Atzmo Nafkole Me Im Yimotze Haganav. And again, according to that mandamar, we learned that a Ganav pays kefil from the pasuk of Im Yimotze Haganav. So hi Dahai im himatze timatze my darshbe. So now we're back to the question: what does that mandamar do with himatze timatze? We just said that the Talmud of Chizkiya learns from himatze timatze that the ganav pays kefil. So again, what if you don't need to learn that? You already learned that from im yimatze haganav that the ganav pays kefil. So what does that Tana do with himatze timatze? And the Gemara says to that, miboy leilechid Rava bar Ahiloi. He's going to use that pasuk for the teaching of Rava bar Ahiloi. The Amar Rava bar Ahiloi, because Rava bar Ahiloi says, my time of the Rav, the Amar Mode Beknas v'yachar bo Edom Potter. What's the reason of Rav? That Rav says that let's say a person admits by a fine, but then Edom come anyway and are mechayev the person, but still, since he admitted to the Knas, he's Potter. Where do we learn that from? Dechsiv, as it's written in the pasuk, im himatze timatze. It's exactly this pasuk. It says himatze timatze. It means to say im himatze be'edim timatze be'dayanim. If the person is found guilty with witnesses, then it can be found with the judges. Meaning, if the witnesses are the ones that really made him chayev, prat l'marshias atzmo. That excludes a case where the person made himself, rendered himself wicked. If he was modeh b'knas, even if Edom came afterwards, he's going to be pater from the knas. So in other words, according to the Manda Amar, that im yimotze haganav teaches that a ganav pays kefil, so then im himotze timotze teaches the idea that modeh b'knas v'yachar kach bo Edom is pater. And the Gemara continues going back to the other Manda Amar, Ulamanda Amar tarvayu b'toin tainas ganav, and according to the one who says that both psukim, im yimotze haganav and im lo yimotze haganav, are talking about toin tainas ganav. Dahai im himotze timotze mapik le ganav atzmo, that according to that Manda Amar, himotze timotze is talking about the ganav himself, so marshia atzmo menolan. So where does that Manda Amar learn out the idea that the marshia atzmo, that somebody admits, is pater from a knas? And so the Gemara says that Manda Amar will learn it from another pasuk. May Asher Yarshian Elohim. He learns it from the pasuk of Asher Yarshian Elohim, that the court is the one that found him guilty. Velo hamarshiyas atzmo, not somebody who makes himself guilty, not somebody who admits. And so the Gemara says, Ulamanda Amar chad beganav echad betoin tainas ganav. But according to the one who says that one of those psukim was ganav, one was toin tainas ganav, the aisi lema himotze timotze lemarshiyas atzmo, that he learned marshiyas atzmo from himotze timotze, as we just said. So hay Asher Yarshian my darshbe. What does that Manda Amar do with Asher Yarshian? And the Gemara explains, Amar Lach, he will say to you, Hahumi boy le lemod beknas pater. That Manda Amar will say to you that pasuk of Asher Yarshian Elohim simply means a moda beknas is pater. Meaning that pasuk teaches that if somebody admits by a knas is pater, and then you also have the pasuk of himatze timatze to say it goes even further. Even moda beknas v'achar kach bo Edom is pater. Uman Amar tarvayu b'toin tainas ganav. But the one who says that both psukim are by toin tainas ganav, and so therefore he only has one drasha. He only has Asher Yarshian Elohim to teach the idea of moda b'knas. So he holds, kasavar, that Manda Amar holds, moda b'knas v'yachar kach bo Edom chayev. That if a person would admit by a knas, but then Edom would come, he'd actually be chayev. Meaning he only has one pasuk for moda b'knas, so it only teaches us moda b'knas is pater, but not moda b'knas v'yachar kach bo Edom is pater. Rather, that Manda Amar would say moda b'knas v'yachar kach bo Edom is chayev. And the Gemara continues, Ulaman damar chad beganav echad betoin tainas ganav, and according to the one who says that by the psukim of im yimotze haganav and im lo yimotze haganav, that one is talking about the ganav himself and one is talking about toin tainas ganav, the nafgale ganav mehasum, that man damar ultimately is learning that a ganav pays kefil from that pasuk of im yimotze haganav. So bishlama im himotze timotze. So we understand, we've already explained what we use im himotze timotze for, according to that man damar and l'chid Rava bar Ahiloi. That's for the teaching of Rava bar Ahiloi. Again, the idea of the idea of moda v'knas v'achar kach bo Edom, that it is pater. Aval kol hani prati lamali. But still, what about all of the pratim? What about all of the specifications by himatze timotze? You no longer need those according to that Manda Amar, because everything was really learned out from im yimotze haganav. We already learned out everything. We even learned out to exclude karkos and avodim and shtaros. We said that on the previous daf. And so therefore, what do we need all the pratim by himatze timotze for according to that Manda Amar? And the Gemara says to that, Kidetana de Rabbi Shmuel, it's as was taught in the yeshiva of Rabbi Shmuel, the Tana de Rabbi Shmuel, because it was taught in the yeshiva of Rabbi Shmuel, called Parsha Shenem Ravinishnas. Anytime you have a parsha that was already stated, but then it's repeated, Lo Nishnas El Ladavar Shenes Chadish. But the only reason it's repeated is for that one new thing that we're learning. We don't need to figure out what to do with all the extra terms. As Rashi explains, Kolhani Prati Lamali Ilamute Karkos Vavodim Ushtaras. If you're going to say it's to exclude Karka and Avodim and Shtaras Kedaman, like we just said earlier, Ha'im Itulu Lahanach Mehanach Prati Dechsivi Baal Kol Devar Pesha. We already excluded those from all of the specifications that were written by that other pasuk of Al Kol Devar Pesha, again, which is talking. That's the pasuk of Im Yimotze Haganav, which is talking about the fact that the Ganav pays kefil. We already said that. What do we do with the pratim by Im Himotze Timotze? And the Gemara says, Shenis Chadish, but you're correct. The pasuk is simply repeating, everything is being repeated, but really just to teach that one new Chiddush, meaning, Im himatzeh be'edim, timatzeh b'dayanim, meaning to teach you that Chiddush, that if you have Edim, if the person is found guilty with Edim, then the judges can impose the Kefel Knas, Prat l'moda b'knas, that's to exclude Moda b'knas, as we said above. And the Gemara continues, Ve'emo ganav atzmo b'shvua, but why don't we say that a ganav himself, he only pays kefil? Maybe we should say a ganav only pays kefil with a shvua, with an oath, because again, if you're learning from im yimotze haganav and im lo yimotze haganav, if im yimotze haganav means that a ganav himself pays kefil, and im lo yimotze haganav means that a toin tainus ganav pays kefil, we know a toin tainus ganav only pays kefil by a shvua, maybe that's true by a ganav also, and the Gemara says to that, lo sal kadaitach, don't think that that is correct. The Tanya, because we learned in a brayso, Rabbi Yaakov Omer, Rabbi Yaakov says, Yishalim, it says that the ganav pays kefil shalo b'shvu. It means even if the ganav didn't take any oath. Ata omer shalo b'shvu, oeino ela b'shvu. You're saying it's without an oath. Maybe it is with an oath. Maybe only with an oath he pays kefil. Amrit lo kachaya. So we say that is not the case. My lo kachaya. What does it mean that that's not the case? Why is that not the case? Amar Abaye says lo lichtov rachmana shnayim yishalim beganav. Because really the pasuk doesn't even need to write that you pay kefil, that you pay 2 times the amount by a ganav. V'leisi b'kal v'chomer mitoin tainas ganav. We could just learn it out from a kal v'chomer from toin tainas ganav. If toin tainas ganav pays kefil, certainly a ganav himself pays kefil. Umat toin tainas ganav devehetero asal liyade. If by toin tainas ganav, where he originally got the item, he got it in a permissible fashion. Toin tainas ganav is a case where a person was a shomer on an item, and then he tried to get out of having to give the item back by saying it was stolen, and that was actually false. He took an oath that it was stolen. That was a false oath. But there he originally got the item beheter, and Omar Kra l'shalim trei, and the pasuk says he has to pay kefil, he has to pay double, 2 times the amount. Ganev atzmo, so the Ganev himself, that he got the item in the first place in a prohibited manner. Lo kol shekain, isn't it obvious that he has to pay kefil? Ela shnayim yishalim, the kosev rachmana b'ganev atzmo lamali. So why does it say shnayim yishalim? That the pasuk wrote by Ganev atzmo. Why does it say the pasuk? Why does it say the word shnayim yishalim? It means that afilu shelo b'shvu. It means that he has to pay kefil even if he didn't take any oath. And Rashi explains, Ve'ema ganav atzmo lo yishalim kefil at she'yishav ala shaker. We should say that a ganav himself doesn't pay kefil unless he swears falsely. Hoel umikroy delel nafkal on ganav atzmo. Since we're learning from the earlier psukim, which again mentioned a shvua by a tointan as ganav, that's where we're learning ganav also. So we should say that. And the Gemara said, no, you don't say that because you really don't even need a pasuk. You could have learned it from a kal v'chomer. The fact that we have a pasuk says that it's even shalo b'shvua. But the Gemara continues, V'hai im himatzei lahachiyu da'asa. Is it really true that im himatzei is coming for the teachings that we discussed above? But don't we need it for something else? There's another halacha that we learn from Im Himatzeh. L'chidetanya, we learn it from the following brayso, Yado, his hand, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Samech Hey Amud Aleph.